I'm really excited here to show you one of my favorite pieces that we have coming up on our Important Watches auction, which will take place on April 30th in New York. The auction will also be hosted live on our website and broadcasted on Facebook Live. I have right in front of me one of the highlight pieces of our upcoming watch sale that I'm really excited about. And it was only a few days ago that I got back from Michigan where I picked up the watch from its owner. Paul Newman is one of the American icons. Not only was he a famous and successful actor and philanthropist, but he was also really active driving race cars. And that's where the story of the Paul Newman Rolex Daytona starts. Rolex unveiled the Daytona in the early 60s and named it after the famous raceway, which is in Florida, the Daytona. Paul Newman was a fanatic about racing and loved racing, especially on this track. His wife had given him one of the Rolexes that had come out at that time that were really designed to match the speed and style of the racetrack. It was him wearing that watch so often, as he was often photographed as a celebrity race car driver, that really built the cult following of the Paul Newman Daytona. What's interesting though is that these watches did very poorly on retail shelves at that time. They were a big departure from the normal, more conservative Rolex designs with the introduction of the color and the overall look of the dial. So they called them the exotic dials because they were exotic for what Rolex represented. So even though these watches were only a few $100s, retailers actually had a really hard time selling them, which is funny to think about considering how much they're worth now. The current owner of the watch was an accountant for a jeweler back in the 80s. He paid a big price for the watch of $800, which maybe was a lot in the 1980s, but it's very little considering what it's worth now. And shortly after buying this watch in the 80s, he set it in his drawer and basically never wore it. And what's interesting is that the current owner didn't know his watch was worth that much until there was a recent Antiques Roadshow where a war veteran had a Daytona that he had bought a long time ago when he was back in the war, and his watch was estimated to be worth more than $400,000. It was then through his own research that he realized that he actually had a very valuable watch. And he reached out to Fortuna directly because he'd seen that we had a very successful track record of selling Rolexes, but especially the Paul Newman Daytonas. In today's day and age, I think it's one of the most beautifully and subtly designed dials on the market. The balance and the contrast of the white subregisters against the black dial with the very delicate red minute track around the outside, overall, in my opinion, creates one of the most beautiful dials you'll see in a watch today. This watch is one of the most sought after for vintage watch collectors, and especially collectors of vintage Rolexes. And one of the reasons why vintage Rolexes have become so popular is that the value of them has continued to climb, and I don't expect to see it dropping anytime soon. Because there were only so many watches on the market, a lot of them were ruined or torn apart over the years. And so the ones that you find that are still intact, I believe will continue to climb in value.